Imagine a world where some of the most powerful technologies ever created were kept hidden, locked away behind palace walls, guarded by emperors, and protected under the threat of death. Hello and welcome to Fact Retainer. Today's episode was written by John and it covers forbidden inventions by ancient China that changed history. Paper was invented in 105 CE by Kai Lun. Kai Lun took tree bark, old rags, hemp and fishing nets, mashed them together into a pulpy mixture, flattened it out, dried it, and just like that, he created lightweight, portable, affordable paper. China kept the paper-making process a carefully guarded secret for over 600 years. It gave China a massive advantage. They could document everything from taxes, laws, science, art, and poetry. Knowledge moved faster, administration got smoother. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was stuck scratching messages onto wax tablets or writing on parchment made from animal skins. Europe was still using something called vellum, which was made from calf skin. It could take an entire calf just to make one book. Imagine needing a whole farm just to build a library. The secret was revealed around 751 CE, after a battle between the Chinese and the Arabs in Central Asia. Two papermakers were captured and the knowledge of papermaking spread across the Islamic world and eventually reached Europe. But it wasn't till around 1150 CE that Europe got its first paper mill in Spain. From there, things took off. Writing exploded, education expanded, and centuries later, paper helped fuel revolutions, religions, and Renaissance thinking. But for more than half a millennium, China held the keys to the written word. Kites were invented in China at around 500 BCE, attributed to the philosopher Mozi and his student Luban. Originally made from bamboo and silk, kites began as simple flying objects used for military signalling, measuring distances, and testing wind conditions. Ancient Chinese generals used kites to send messages across battlefields, set ambushes, and even to frighten enemies by flying them with loud materials attached. The knowledge of kite construction was kept within military circles. The design and applications were not widely shared outside of China for centuries, because kites provided strategic communication advantages in both warfare and surveying. Without kites, other civilizations relied on slower messenger systems or direct visual signals, limiting their communication speed and battlefield awareness. This put them at a disadvantage in rapidly changing combat situations and in mapping difficult terrain. Kites also contributed to meteorology and scientific observation. Chinese scholars experimented with kites to study air currents and weather patterns hundreds of years before similar studies in Europe could take place. In some Chinese traditions, kites were flown to send away bad luck and diseases. It was believed that flying a kite at night could scare away evil spirits, combining both practical and spiritual uses. Kites spread to Korea and Japan by the 6th century CE, and reached the Islamic world and Europe through the Silk Road by the 13th and 14th centuries. Marco Polo reportedly described seeing kites in China during the 13th century, sparking European curiosity. Once adopted, kites revolutionized communication and scientific observation elsewhere. By the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin famously used a kite to study electricity, showing how an ancient Chinese invention truly changed history and contributed to modern science. Silk was invented at around 2700 BCE by Empress Lei, who discovered it while sipping tea beneath a mulberry tree. Silk came from the cocoons of domesticated silkworms, fed exclusively on mulberry leaves. When a cocoon was dropped into hot water, it unraveled into a single, incredibly strong and glossy thread. Empress Lei realized it could be spun into luxurious fabric, and silk production, known as sericulture, began. The process was a closely guarded state secret for over 2,000 years. Exporting silkworms or revealing the production method was punishable by death. This secrecy gave China a complete monopoly on silk, which became its most valuable export. Foreign demand was enormous, but only China knew how to make it. Without silk production, other nations had to rely on wool, linen, and cotton. These materials lacked silk's softness, shimmer, and strength. Silk garments were lighter, more breathable, and more comfortable in a range of climates. It quickly became a status symbol across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. By the Han Dynasty, silk was the backbone of trade along the Silk Road. It was exchanged for horses, spices, gold, and precious stones. Roman records show silk was sold for its weight in gold. The Roman Senate even tried banning silk clothing because it was seen as too feminine. But demand only grew, and a huge amount of wealth flowed out of Rome and into China. A single silk robe could take thousands of cocoons to produce. China's silk industry supported entire towns, with women and families managing every stage from worm to weave. The secret eventually slipped out around the 6th century CE. According to legend, 2 monks smuggled silkworm eggs to the Byzantine Empire, hidden in bamboo walking sticks. The Byzantines began their own production, breaking China's monopoly. But even after that, China remained the largest silkworm producer for centuries. The global textile industry was transformed, but for more than 2 millennia, China held total control over the world's most prized fabric. Printing first began in 868 CE. Woodblock printing began in China during the Tang Dynasty. Entire pages were carved into wood blocks, inked, and then stamped onto paper. So it will come as no surprise to learn that the oldest book ever printed was made in China. This was the Diamond Sutra, which was printed in 868 CE. Printing later evolved into a movable clay type that was invented by Bi Sheng in the 1040s. Printing in China remained an inside secret and state-controlled, used to spread approved texts, religious doctrine, and bureaucratic forms. During this period in Europe, they were still copying books by hand, making them so valuable that they were chained to desks. Meanwhile, China mass-produced calendars, ads, and books centuries before anyone else. The technology slowly moved west along trade routes, but remained mostly confined to Asia. It wasn't until the 15th century that Johannes Gutenberg created a metal movable type printing press in Germany in around 1440. Gutenberg's press sparked the European printing revolution, with 20 million books being created over the following 50 years. But it all came nearly 600 years after China had already been mass-producing printed materials. Traditional Chinese medicine, also known as TCM, first began when Zhang Zhongjing's Shangzan Zabinlun laid the first foundations for TCM, which included pulse diagnosis, herbal formulas, acupuncture, and moxibustion. TCM quickly became central to public health. Over 13,000 herbs were catalogued. Diagnostic methods required no surgery. While Europe bloodlet, used leeches, and prayed, China treated internal illness with rhubarb, ephedra, and ginseng. By the 11th century, China had medical licensing exams, rotating hospital physicians, and urban clinics. The knowledge was carefully preserved in official texts, passed through elite medical academies, and often kept in handwritten manuscripts that were not shared outside of the empire. The terminology and theoretical framework made it difficult for outsiders to understand or replicate without full cultural immersion. This restricted its spread and kept China ahead in therapeutic diversity and disease management. Western exposure began in the 1500s, but it wasn't until 1972, when Nixon visited China, that TCM caught global attention. Today it's used in more than 180 countries. The World Health Organization officially recognized TCM diagnostic categories as of 2019. China's early investment in herbal science gave it a head start of centuries in medical knowledge and practices, while the rest of the world relied on superstition and inconsistent remedies. Gunpowder was created in the 9th century CE, While seeking immortality, Chinese alchemists mixed saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, which invented the explosive, gunpowder. Ironically, rather than stopping death, they had just created something that has since been involved in hundreds of millions of deaths. The state banned knowledge sharing of gunpowder as it gave the Chinese explosive superiority, breaching walls and routing enemies, while others still used catapults. In 1232, thunder crash bombs were used against the Mongols. The technology then spread west through Mongolian conquest. Once Europe developed cannons and handheld firearms in the 13 and 1400s, traditional castle walls became obsolete. The 100 Years' War saw the first widespread use of gunpowder weapons in Western battles. By 1600, muskets and cannons had redefined military power. China's early lead in explosive technology gave it unmatched defense and offense capabilities for nearly 400 years. While others were still perfecting archery, China was building rockets and hurling explosives. Toilet paper was first used in 589 CE. Yan Zhitu wrote in 589 CE that he used paper for hygiene, but not paper with writing on it. By 851 CE, China mass-produced toilet paper. By 1393, the Ming court ordered 720,000 sheets for the imperial family, which they used in their private toilets. It is believed that they even had flushing toilets over 2,400 years ago, after a contraption was discovered in ancient Chinese ruins. Toilet paper was unknown to the West. In Europe, people used moss, sticks, corn cobs, hay, rags, and even their own hands. Toilet paper didn't reach the US until 1857, where it was marketed as a medical product. Rolls didn't appear until the 1880s. China had solved personal hygiene over 1200 years earlier. Rockets were first built in the 13th century CE. Using gunpowder, Song Dynasty engineers attached bamboo tubes to arrows, creating the world's first rockets. By 1232, rockets were used to defend Kaifeng from Mongols. Some were mounted on dragon-shaped launchers combining firepower and psychological warfare. The tech remained classified. Rockets created panic in enemy ranks due to their noise and unpredictability. Other nations had no equivalent to long-range explosive firepower. By comparison, medieval Europe and the Islamic world still relied on flaming arrows, ballistae, and catapults. Eventually, Mongol invasions spread rocket knowledge to the west. By the 1400s, India had iron-cased rockets. These inspired Mysorean rockets, which were used against the British. Europe lagged until the 17th century. While others were still dragging siege towers, China was launching fire from the sky. The compass was invented in the 2nd century BCE. Originally a feng shui tool, the compass used lodestone to point south. By the Song Dynasty, it became a navigational tool. With it, Chinese sailors sailed confidently in cloudy weathers and open seas. The state kept the tech secret to protect trade routes and naval dominance. Europe still relied on the stars, limiting their exploration. China, meanwhile, expanded the maritime Silk Road and built a global sea presence. The compass spread through Arab traders by the 12th century, reaching Europe just in time for the Age of Discovery. European explorers like Vasco da Gama and Columbus relied on the compass during the Age of Discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries. The compass revolutionized navigation worldwide, enabling global exploration, colonization, and the modern shipping industry. China's early invention paved the way for centuries of maritime dominance. The seismograph was invented in 132 CE by Zhang Heng. This instrument was a bronze urn consisting of 8 dragon heads, with each having a patterned toad underneath. When an earthquake occurred, a ball dropped out of the dragon's mouth and into the toad's mouth. The direction of the quake was indicated by which dragon the ball fell from. It reportedly detected earthquakes hundreds of miles away, before they were felt in the capital, allowing relief efforts to be mobilized to the affected regions promptly. This tech was state-owned and closely guarded. Other civilizations had no way to detect earthquakes until the 1800s. Zhang's design laid the foundation for modern earthquake monitoring nearly 1,800 years ahead of Europe, who, even after all that time had gone by, still used similar principles to Heng's design. Thank you very much for watching. Which of these inventions surprised you the most? Leave a comment below. Also, for notifications of upcoming videos, feel free to subscribe.